Remember how we talked in the last hour how with the atheistic worldview, the evolutionary naturalist worldview, no matter what the facts say, they have to interpret them according to the presupposition, and that's exactly what to do. Once again, if we consider the evidence, we cannot separate ourselves from our worldview, from our ultimate belief system. Now, why do I say this? Well, I say this because the Christian creationist and the atheist will who believes in macroevolution, both will appeal to DNA, both will look at fossils, both will look at rock layers. They're both going to look at the same evidence to prove their position, and they're going to come to two diametrically opposed conclusions. If one looks at the complexity of cells, of even single-celled organisms, and the amazing complexity of living creatures, which are millions of times more complex and amazing than something like a nuclear submarine, one would obviously conclude that macroevolution is impossible. An insane idea. It is not simply that thousands of different things must evolve together perfectly to form a single cell, but a creature made up of billions of cells must have thousands of things simultaneously evolving perfectly to move to the next level. As Jason Lyle notes, quote, Darwin could not possibly have anticipated the astonishing intricacy of even the simplest single-celled organism. Every living cell of every organism contains a host of complex biochemical machines, each cooperating with the other to enable the survival of the entire cell. The parts of the cell are interdependent. If any one of them malfunctions, it can lead to the death of the entire cell. In multicellular organisms, the cells themselves are specialized, each performing a different task to contribute to the survival of the whole organism. Hearts, kidneys, and lungs all work together. Without one, the others could not survive. Independent parts challenge the idea of particles to people evolution. Evolution is supposed to happen in a gradual step-like fashion. One by one, mutations are supposed to gradually change one kind of organism into another. So we must ask the question, which evolved first, hearts, kidneys, or lungs? Each is useless without the other two. A stepwise evolutionary process for any independent system would seem to be impossible at the outset. Even within a single living cell, how could the various parts have come about in a gradual fashion? Each part cannot survive without the others. Such a system is said to be irreducibly complex, because its complexity cannot be reduced without destroying functionality. Any irreducibly complex system cannot have come about by an evolutionary process, since every piece requires all the other pieces at the same time. Many machines made by human beings are also irreducibly complex. A car does not work unless all of its essential parts are functioning. Since many of the parts of the car are irreducibly complex, it would be logical to conclude that the car is not made by an evolutionary process. It is skillfully planned and made by people who have designed every part to function like with all the others. Likewise, living beings have been made by the master planner who has skillfully prepared every part to function together with all the other parts. End of quote. Of course, that is God, the God of the Bible, the Lord Jesus Christ. In addition, it must be able to pass these changes off to the next generation in a permanent manner. Atheist microevolutionists deal with this mind-boggling difficulty by appealing to time. Okay, we say God does miracles, the evolutionist says time does their miracles. One takes matter, plus chance, and incredibly long periods of time, then virtually anything is possible. Listen to how Richard Dawkins, the noted atheist, deals with this argument. And he writes this. And I'll read what he says, and then I'll make some comments. There are about 70 separate chemical reactions involved in photosynthesis. He's quoting here a book against evolution. There are about 70 separate chemical reactions involved in photosynthesis. One biologist said, it is truly a miraculous event. Green plants have been called nature's factories, beautiful, quiet, non-polluting, producing oxygen, recycling water, and feeding the world. Did they happen just by chance? Is that truly believable? End of quote. No, he quoted somebody. Now, this is Dawkins talking. No, it's not believable. But the repetition of example after example gets us nowhere. Creationist logic is always the same. Some natural phenomenon is too statistically improbable, too complex, too beautiful, too awe-inspiring to have come into existence by chance. Design is the only alternative to chance that the authors can imagine. Therefore, a designer must have done it. And science's answer to this faulty logic is always the same. Design is not the only alternative to chance. Natural selection is a better alternative. Now let me stop there. That statement is disingenuous because according to their own worldview, natural selection is a product of chance. So what he's saying is complete nonsense. Natural selection comes about through a chance process. The alternatives are creation by an infinite personal God or macroevolution by chance. The evolutionist believes that by chance natural selection comes about, or came about. In other words, they believe that pure contingencies, or chance, and a complete randomness or chaos, can produce order, structure, and unchanging laws if given enough time. This, beloved, is a faith commitment. It's a faith commitment. It is about as scientific or objective as an animist who worships rocks and sticks. So if you read these books carefully and you understand your Christian worldview and your theology, you can see these people are, as Scripture says, they're fools. Well, let me continue with Dawkins' quote. And by the way, Dawkins is considered as genius by the intellectual world today. And design is not a real alternative at all because it raises an even bigger problem than it solves. Who designed the designer? And we stop again. Now, as Christians, we don't believe that people on earth came here by a flying saucer. Timothy Leary used to teach this, that maybe we were deposited here by aliens thousands of years ago. Or the Twilight Zone, where they had an episode where two ships crashed on a planet in different parts, and the guy in the ship who survived, his name was Adam, and the woman who survived on the other ship from another planet, her name was Eve. Okay, we don't believe in that. We believe that the world was created by an infinite personal God who has always existed. He's infinite and eternal. So he's raising here something that's completely false. It ignores the Christian world and life view. God has revealed himself to man in propositional form, and belief in Jesus Christ and Jehovah is the only rational position, epistemologically, ethically, and logically. Well, let me continue with this quote here. Dawkins. Chance and design both fail as solutions to the problem of statistical improbability. Because one of them is the problem, and the other one regresses to it. Natural selection is a real solution. It is the only workable solution that has ever been suggested. Well, let me just make a comment. It is the only workable solution that has ever been suggested if you're an atheist. If you presuppose that God doesn't exist. Workable? No. An offered solution? Yes, but it's not workable. And it is not only a workable solution, it is a solution of stunning elegance and power. Yeah, if you're an atheist, I suppose. What is it that makes natural selection succeed as a solution to the problem of improbability, where chance and design both fail at the starting gate? Now here's his punchline, so to speak. The answer is that natural selection is a cumulative process which breaks the problem of improbability into small pieces. Each of the small pieces is slightly improbable, but not prohibitively so. When large numbers of these slightly improbable events are stacked up in a series, the end product of the accumulation is a very, very improbable indeed. Improbable enough to be far beyond the reach of chance. It is these end products that form the subject of creationist wearisome recycled argument. The creationist completely misses the point because he insists on treating the genesis of statistical improbability as a single, one-off event. He doesn't understand the power of accumulation. Once again, he's completely misrepresented the Christian position. Our position is that every step of this process is improbable and indeed impossible. And I'm going to demonstrate that when we talk about the so-called development of the first single-cell organism. Continuing. In climbing Mount Improbable, I express the point in a parable. On one side of the mountain is a sheer cliff impossible to climb, but on the other side is a gentle slope to the summit. On the summit sits a complex device such as an eye or a bacterial flagellar motor. The absurd notion that such complexity could spontaneously self-assemble is symbolized by leaping from the foot of the cliff to the top in one bound. And here's his central point. Evolution, by contrast, goes around the back of the mountain and creeps up the gentle slope to the summit. Easy! Exclamation point. The principle of climbing the gentle slope as opposed to leaping up the precipice is so simple. One is tempted to marvel that it took so long for Darwin to arrive on the scene and discover it. Okay, so we call this the gentle slope argument. And what they do is they stretch out everything with time, billions and billions of years, or several hundreds of millions of years, and what is obviously impossible to them becomes not just improbable, but probable. And that's why these morons are looking for bacteria on Mars, and they're looking for, oh, maybe bacteria lives off one of the planets near one of the moons of Jupiter or whatever. Or they presuppose evolution, and they're not going to find bacteria on Mars because evolution is false. And if they did, it would have been put there by God, not by evolution. The atheistic naturalist takes something that seems obviously impossible, and he divides it up into millions of little pieces and adds millions of years. And voila! What seemed impossible actually is now easy and totally reasonable. This raises the question, what is the problem with this view? And this is the view of all naturalists and atheists. What is the problem with this kind of thinking? This argument presupposes that the little steps are easy. It presupposes that these little steps are easy. That's the whole point of calling them little steps. When a study of life, DNA, and nature reveals not small steps, but a series of insurmountable cliffs taller than Mount Everest. They're not small, easy steps. That's a presupposition. There are a number of reasons for this statement. Let's take step number one, the formation of a single-celled organism. Now, when Darwin formed his theory of natural selection, single-celled organisms were regarded as these extremely exceptionally simple life forms. Super simple. Barely above the level of dirt or mud. With their way overly simplistic concept of a cell, by analogy we could call it their version of a single cell like a wheelbarrow, they could easily conceive of the move from inanimate matter to the single cell to a simple cell as feasible.
Jacob, don't touch the chair.
But with us standing here in 2011, May 22nd, 2011, the day after the world was supposed to end, according to Harold Camping, twice proved to be a false prophet. Anyway, after 150 years of further research, we now know that each individual cell was a very complex factory, akin more to a space shuttle than to a wheelbarrow. In fact, if you ever get a chance, there was a movie came out. What was that movie? Who was that guy? Anyway, it was they show a diagram. It was a movie about how schools were excluding people who believed in creationism. And who's the guy's name?
Ben Stein.
Ben Stein. Yeah, Ben Stein was the narrator. And they got a bunch of guys together and they actually had a computer animation of what a cell looked like as it worked. It worked. And it looked like General Motors. I mean, it looked like a big factory with all these things doing things. That's what a cell looked like in this animation. It's just mind-boggling how complex a cell is. We know that cells are extremely complex. To go from inanimate matter to a space shuttle is not a small step. It's not a small leap. It's not a gentle slope, but rather it is a sheer cliff several thousand miles high. They acknowledge that fact, but they're not scientific, so they will not. Once one understands the complexity of a single cell, the idea of moving from inanimate matter to such an organism is a blind leap of faith. It's a blind leap of faith. To get an idea of the complexity of a cell, I'm going to quote from a scientist, Michael Denton, and I've edited this down. It's pretty heavy stuff, but pay attention, it's good. Listen to what he said. He writes, and basically what this man has done is he's a scientist, and he's taken a lot of modern discoveries and he's shown how